about the Sunday night, being New Year's Eve. I said,
Pastor Mike was talking about memory. I don't know if y'all have seen these. They're called dementia house shoes, but they're big, fluffy house shoes, and then on the top of them, right above where your toes are, they've got a little card you fill in. It says, "My name is, I live at, call so and so in case of emergency." So if you forget who you are, you can always look down and read it off of your shoes. Or if you forget where you live, you can always look down and read it if you're lost, So, big sellers, yeah. Welcome to Wednesday night Bible class. We've been going through 1 Samuel. We always like to do a quick review for those who might miss the last lesson or two. So, we are in the last of the time of the judges in the Old Testament. After Joshua led the children of Israel into the Promised Land, then they were ruled by a series of judges over about 400 years. So Samuel is the last judge, and the book of 1 Samuel begins with his birth. So now we finished chapter 8. And he is the last judge, and he's getting older. It says we learned last time he had relinquished the legal judging to his two sons, who turned out to be rotten. It says they perverted justice because they took bribes. And so the elders of Israel had come to Samuel and said, these two sons of yours are no good. We want a king like all the other nations. And Samuel was disturbed because he knew that God was their true king. So he takes the matter to God, and God tells Samuel, it's not you they've rejected, they are rejecting me as their king. So God tells Samuel, first, before you allow them to have a king, you tell them all the ways that a king will take from them so that they will be careful what they wish for. So Samuel calls the elders together and tells them, okay, this is what will happen if you have an earthly king. He will take your sons to be in the military. He'll take your sons to work around the palace. He'll take your daughters to be bakers in the palace. He'll take your beast of burden to serve him. He'll take some of your best choice lands that you're using for crops, for his own crops. And what he doesn't take, he will tax. So are you sure that you really want a king? Well, and then Samuel ends the speech by saying, and in the end, when you get a king, when you cry out to God because the king's doing all these things I've told you, God's not going to listen because he will let you suffer the consequences of your stubborn heart. And so after this nice educational speech, do we see the Israelites changing their mind? Not a bit. They say, well, we want a king. We want a king. And the reason for that, we learned, was because the desires of the heart often override the facts in the brain. And our lesson from that was what we call the fallacy of just education. In our country, we've seen our country send billions of taxpayer dollars over the years for sex education in the school, hoping to improve people's behavior, but it's only gotten worse. We've seen our government spend billions of our tax dollars in fighting the war on drugs in an educational effort, and that has failed. We now have more drug deaths than we ever have. And so what we learned was the education fallacy is just the same today as it was 3,000 years ago, that facts alone do not change behavior. We have to change people's hearts. Anyway, so God tells Samuel, okay, let them have a king. So now we begin chapter 9 tonight. All the scriptures are on your lesson sheet. 1 Samuel 9, verse 1 and 2. There was a wealthy, influential man named Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. He was the son of Abiel, son of Zeor, son of Becherah, and son of Ephiah of the tribe of Benjamin. His son Saul was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. And so he was handsome and he was tall. So the word Saul Interestingly, it's interesting how so many words in the Bible have a meaning that are appropriate to the situation. The word Saul means ask for. So Saul becomes the king that the people ask for. So it says he was the most handsome man in Israel. And you see that fitted into Israel's romantic fantasy about a king. And see, just like we said, people have not changed in 3,000 years. Those of you who are old enough remember the romantic times of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy, the Camelot. It was just all over everywhere. This wonderful young couple, this powerful couple, handsome and beautiful. And then 20 years later in the 80s, we had Princess Di. Now we've got Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, just everywhere you look, and so there's just this romantic fantasy we have with power and beauty. And so people have not changed, have we? So we hear that Saul was the most handsome man in the land, and he was tall. He was head and shoulders. So we know that people were smaller back then. Even if you've gone back to New England to 300 or 400 years ago, everything that's that old is smaller. But so we don't really know how tall they were back then. But Saul was apparently 8 to 10 inches taller than anybody else. So in a crowd, you could see all the people, then here's Saul sticking up. So you could always see it. And so that lends an attraction as well as his handsomeness. It says his dad Kish was wealthy, and they were of the smallest tribe, which was Benjamin. Okay, verse 3 and 4. One day Kish's donkeys strayed away, and he told Saul, "Take a servant with you and go look for the donkeys." So Saul took one of the servants and traveled through the hill country of Ephraim, the land of Shashal and the Shalem area, and the entire land of Benjamin, but they couldn't find the donkeys anywhere. And so Kish was a wealthy, influential man. He loses a few donkeys. So I'm sure he's thinking, well, I'll send Saul, my son Saul, and one of the servants, and they'll go off. In a few hours, they'll find him and come back. Well, it turns out they're going here and they go there, and they just travel everywhere. Turns out they're chasing donkeys for several days, and they never find the donkeys. These donkeys just can't seem to be found. Now, at this point in the story, I'm going to explain what we're going to do with this story. Jesus taught with parables. A parable, I heard long ago, a parable could be explained or defined as an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. In other words, an earthly story that has a moral or a spiritual meaning behind it. So what we're doing with this story, an allegory kind of means the same thing. It's a physical story with a moral or a spiritual meaning. So we're going to take this story and have an underlying meaning to it because it really fits quite well. So we're going to define, when we read donkeys in this story, I want you to think about distractions of life. Distractions of life. Now, these are not evil things. We're not talking about bad things. We're talking about non-essential time stealers. Non-essential time stealers. So when we're reading about the donkeys, think about the non-essential time stealers. Okay, so in ancient times, there was no middle class. There was the very wealthy, who were like 1%, and then the other 99% were poor or almost poor. And so if it said Kish was a wealthy man, we knew he was very wealthy. So here he is, he's lost a few donkeys. He sent his son to look for them. And of course, Saul is obeying his father. He's not doing a bad thing. But he's spending lots and lots of time chasing after a very tiny part of his father's wealth. So, the fact that he kept looking and kept looking and kept looking for days and days and days for something that it was really kind of a very small part, infinitesimal part of his father's wealth, makes me think that Kish was probably not a penny-pinching Jew, but a shekel-pinching Jew. He was really particular about what he owned. So I'm sure Saul, with the servant, after several days of looking for these few donkeys, was thinking to himself, is my time, if my efforts really worth all the time I'm spending on this? I just can't seem to find these donkeys, but I can't go back to my father till I find them. So he's still doing that. And so in the same way, I think it's easy for us sometimes to have a moment where we sit down and think, is it really worth, is some distractions I'm caught up in life really worth the time I'm spending on them? I'll give you some examples from our personal lives, Kathy and ours. About 10 years ago, we sold our clinic to the hospital, and so before we did that, I was kind of the HR guy for our 30 employees, and so I'd spend my lunch hours doing all the HR tasks. And so once we sold the hospital, I didn't have to do that anymore, so I got to where while I was eating my lunch, I would get on the computer and play this game called Farkle. I don't know if anybody does that anymore. And at first it was just spend a few minutes doing that, and then as time goes on, I got to where I was spending pretty much the entire lunch hour doing that. And it was a game where you would interact with somebody else somewhere on planet Earth that was playing the same game. So you'd play against somebody, and then it kept up with your wins and your losses. So when you would sign on, it would pick somebody out of cyberspace to play, and you could see their wins and their losses. Anyway, so I did this for several weeks, maybe 2, 3, 4 months. And it got to where it pretty much consumed all of my lunch hour, where I got really nothing else done that was of substance. And finally, one day, when it clicked on the person I was playing that game, now at this point, I probably had 150 wins, 140 losses, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, I clicked on, and this person that I was going to play had 110,000 wins and 90-something thousand losses. That just shocked me. I just thought, what are you doing? What am I doing? I said, obviously they have their whole life, from morning till night is taken up with Farkle. I said, but look at me. I'm spending a whole hour every day on Farkle. I was disgusted with myself. About 20 years ago, Kathy bought a computer. And on that computer, how some computers come with some games on them. Well, she found solitaire. And she started playing solitaire. And apparently, it was unbeknownst to me, but she confessed later that I got to where I was spending way, way too much time playing solitaire, and I wasn't getting stuff done that I should be getting done. I just got this distraction. It was starting to eat into my time, and I let it eat into my time. And since it came with the computer, it wasn't something that she could take off. She took it down to the computer store and had them take it off. Because she said, I just don't need this distraction. Okay, as I was studying for this lesson, here's a third example. Because I'm showing you that nobody's immune to this, okay? So for years, I've gotten up at 5:45 in the morning and had a quiet time. And so I didn't realize it until I studied this lesson about distractions, that I had started letting my phone eat up more of my time for my quiet time. It started out with, I'll just check the weather for the day and be happy. Then it was, I might check a couple of headlines, and I might check, I need to check my emails. So it got to where I was spending more time on my phone and less time with God. And when I started studying this lesson, I thought, I need to quit that. This is the time I've set aside to be with God, and the enemy is letting me let distractions get in the way of my relationship with God. So that's why I wanted to talk about distractions tonight, dealing with distractions, chasing donkeys. So distractions of life are not necessarily bad things. They are just non-essential time stealers. And what's sad is that the time that God gives us each day on this earth, once it's gone, once you go to bed tonight, today is gone. We can never reclaim the time that we've wasted. You know, there's a word called amusements. The word, and it comes from the word muse, M-U-S-E. Muse means to think. So you may have heard of maybe somebody called a muse. He's a thinker. So amuse, a means without. So amusement means something you do without thinking. And so that's a distraction. That's a distraction. So, you know, I've really thought about it as I've studied this lesson. You know, if God allows me to live as long as most of my family, then I'm kind of at, if life's a football game, I'm kind of at the end of the third quarter and going into the fourth quarter. So I've had to ask myself, you know, how should I live this fourth quarter of my life? So whatever quarter you're in, whether it's the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, when that quarter's gone, that quarter's gone. When that life is gone, that life is gone. And so, you know, the world just offers us so many distractions. And it's just another way for Satan to make us ineffective disciples. Because I would bet that if you're here on a Wednesday night church when most folks are home watching TV and being distracted, that Satan knows that he's not going to get you with some major sin. So the way he makes you an ineffective disciple is to soak up all your time with distractions so that you feel like you don't have time to serve God. So, I mean, I don't have to tell you all the distractions that we face. I mean, it just seems like it multiplies every year, what we call content overload. Just so many emails, so many texts, so much stuff that you can read, so many TV. Man alive, when we were, you know, this shows my age, but when we were kids, we had 3 channels on the TV and PBS, and you had to watch them right then. You couldn't save them. And now, goodness gracious, I mean, thousands. You could not watch everything on TV now if you had 200 years and never stopped watching. And then if somebody tells you about a really good show they watched, you want to watch that. I mean, that happens to us. We tell other people about good shows we watch. But, you know, there's sports to watch. There's shopping, you know, online, shopping in person, TV shows, playing on your phone. I mean, there are just endless ways that we can be distracted and waste time. And I'm not saying that some of that is, these are not bad things. It's just if we don't do them in moderation and let them get in the way of serving God, then they become a bad thing. You know, if we get so caught up in our distractions that we say, well, I can't serve in any Ray of Hope ministry. I don't have time to read my Bible. I don't have time to pray. But look at how many hours I'm spending on distractions. You know, I can tell you that Ray of Hope is no different than most churches and most organizations that are suffering for volunteers compared to 20 years ago. It's because people are so caught up, Christians, members, are so caught up with distractions, they don't feel like they have time. But they really do. They're just not dealing with distraction. They're chasing too many donkeys. So I remember, you know, I've told you before, my mother died when I was young, and so my dad's mother came to live with us, and she really was not in good health. She really didn't do anything other than just be there for us kids to come home to so we wouldn't be latchkey kids. But she had a plaque above her bed. I remember reading it for several years before she passed away. And you may have heard this saying before. It's actually, it's a quote from C.T. Studd, who was a 19th century British missionary to Africa, China, and Indies. But this quote that she had above her bed talked about using every day for God. It said, "Just one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last." Okay, let's read verse 5 through 10. Finally, so they're still chasing the donkeys. Finally, they entered the region of Zuph, and Saul said to his servant, "Let's go home. By now my father will be more worried about us than about the donkeys." But the servant said, "I've just thought of something. There's a man of God who lives here in this town. He is held in high honor by all the people because everything he says comes true. Let's go find him. Perhaps he can tell us which way to go. But we don't have anything to offer him, Saul replied. Even our food is gone, and we don't have a thing to give him. They'd been gone so long, they'd ran out of food. Well, the servant said, I have one small silver piece. We can at least offer it to the man of God and see what happens. In those days, if people wanted a message from God, they would say, let's go and ask the seer. For prophets used to be called seers. All right, Saul agreed, let's try it. So they started into the town where the man of God lived. So the servant tells Saul, let's not go home yet. I've heard there's a man of God here in this town that we're near, and he can tell us which way to go. But Saul says, well, he'll require something of us. So how many of us say, God, I know I spend way too many hours a week playing on my phone, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, TV, sports, shopping, fill in the blank, whatever it is your distraction is. But God, I'd like to know what your plan for my life is. I'd like to know what your vision for my life is. So God could answer, just like they're talking about in this verse here, how much distraction time are you willing to give up so that I can show you how I need you to serve me? Do you just want to know? Or are you willing to do? What are you willing to give up in your life so I can show you, so I can open the doors? I'm not going to open the doors till you're ready to walk through them. I don't want you just to peek and see what's in there. I want you to walk through the door. But first you have to give up some of that baggage that you're carrying. You have to quit chasing some of those donkeys so that you have time to be the disciple for me that you need to be. You know, how many of y'all got gift cards for Christmas? You know why merchants sell gift cards? This has nothing to do with the lesson. You know what percentage of gift cards never get used? Over 25%. So they love to sell gift cards because they just get the money. They don't have to do anything for 25% of the people that buy them. That's why, a lot of places will give you an extra gift card. If you buy $50, they'll give you $5 or $10 extra because they know most of it's not coming back anyway. Interesting, huh? Anyway, so God gives you a gift card of time every day, but it's got a 24-hour time limit. It's kind of like the manna in the wilderness. You had to use it or lose it. So the gift card of time that God gives you every day, you have to use it or lose it. So God could say, what good is my vision for your life if you're so caught up chasing donkeys, caught up chasing distractions, that you don't have time for me anyway? So he could say, here's a novel idea. If you're willing to give up some of those distractions, then I'll show you some open doors where you can serve me. I'll show you some time where you'll have time to pray. I'll show you where you do have some time to study and be the kind of person that you can be for me and be that shining light and not just a run-of-the-mill Christian. Verse 11 and 12. As they were climbing the hill to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water. So Saul and his servant asked, is the seer here today? Yes, they replied, stay right on this road. He's at the town gates. He has just arrived to take part in a public sacrifice up at the place of worship. So they go to the city and they ask, is the seer in? The young women coming out to draw water say, yes, he is. The lesson is the seer, God, is always in. I don't know what kind of business you are all in, but, I'm sure some of you are in businesses where you get told you weren't here when I needed you. I hear that every time I take a day or two off. I hear it the next week. You weren't here when I needed you. And I think a lot of you are probably in similar type businesses. It's not that people don't want to be there all the time, but everybody needs to take some time off and have some leisure and have some rest. But God is always in. God doesn't take vacation. God doesn't have sick days. I always like Jeremiah 33:3, which is, ever heard God's phone number? God's phone number is Jeremiah 33:3. Call to me and I will answer you. Call to me and I will answer you. That's God's phone number, Jeremiah 33:3. When you call God, you never get a busy signal. You never get somebody from India. You never get a computerized voice. He never takes a weekend or a vacation. God never has to sleep. God never gets sick. He never gets tired. God never gets old, slow, or depressed. And I got to thinking about this. People have been praying to God for several thousand years now, 24 hours a day, round the clock. And after thousands of years, 24 hours a day of listening to us whine and complain, He still answers. Isn't that amazing? I think if it's me, I would have quit answering by now. We've got an awesome God. So God is always in because He loves us and He craves fellowship with us, and He wants us to fulfill His purpose for our lives. But we can't do that if we're caught up with chasing donkeys. 13 through 20. Hurry and catch him before he goes up there to eat. The guest won't begin eating until he arrives to bless the food. So they entered the town, and as they passed through the gates, Samuel was coming out toward them to go to the place of worship. Now the Lord told Samuel the previous day, about this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him to be the leader of my people, and I think other versions say the prince of my people. He will rescue them from the Philistines, for I have looked down on my people in mercy and have heard their cry. Back page. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said, that's the man I told you about. So, Samuel can see him because he's head and shoulders taller than everybody else. And he's coming towards him. He says, that's the man I told you about. He will rule my people. Just then Saul approached Samuel at the gateway and asked, can you please tell me where the seer's house is? I am the seer, Samuel replied. Go up to the place of worship ahead of me. We will eat there together, and in the morning I'll tell you what you want to know and send you on your way. But don't worry about those donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, for they've been found. I'm here to tell you that you and your family are the focus of all of Israel's hopes. So God had told Samuel, who was the seer, the day before, I'm going to show you a man tomorrow from Benjamin, and he's the one you're supposed to anoint to be prince. Now remember, the people asked for a king, but God knows that he's the king. So he refers to him as the prince. And so when Saul appears, God nudges Samuel again and said, there's the guy. There's the guy. That really tall, handsome man coming towards you, that is him. So Saul asked Samuel where the seer's house is. Samuel says, you're looking at the seer. Go to my house. We've got a meal planned, and tomorrow I'll tell you what God has planned for your lives. But first, you got to forget about the donkeys. If you're worried about the donkeys, I can't tell you what God's plan for your life is. Okay, verse 21. Saul replied, but I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe in Israel, and my family is the least important in all the families of the tribe. Why are you talking like this to me? So Saul obviously had no idea what was coming. And so it's interesting when, back when we studied the book of Judges and looked at Gideon in Judges chapter 6, and the angel came to Gideon, almost exactly the same that Gideon said. Both of them basically said, I'm a nobody. Why are you talking to me? I'm a nobody. You don't want me. I'm one of God's nobodies. But Samuel tells Saul, Samuel is saying to Saul, yes, God can use you, but first you've got to get rid of your distractions. Verse 22 to 24. Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and placed them at the head of the table, honoring them above the 30 special guests. Samuel then instructed the cook to bring Saul the finest cut of meat. The piece had been set aside for the guest of honor. So the cook brought in the meat and placed it before Saul. Go ahead and eat it, Samuel said. I was saving it for you even before I invited these others. And that was because God had told them the day before that the prince would be coming to town and to have a meal for him. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. So, like I say, Samuel was told by God the day before, the prince is coming. I want you to anoint him, but first I want you to have a feast for him. And the commentators believe he invited the elders of that area of Israel, to a feast because they had been the ones asking for the king. And so Samuel puts him in the best seat, the head of the table, and gives him the best cut of meat. And we really don't know exactly what that was. We have an inclination back in Leviticus. What was considered the best cut of a sacrificed animal was the right hindquarter, the right back leg. Because that was in the temple and the tabernacle, that was reserved for the highest priests. And so we assume that maybe that's what was done here. We don't know for sure. But it indicated this is the most important person at the table. So rather than Samuel, who was the judge at that time, who should have the head seat at the table and get the choicest cut of meat, he is relinquishing that and putting Saul in that seat and giving him the choicest cut of meat. So he's implying to these elders, this is the man that's going to be king that you asked for to be king. Okay, verse 25 through 28. 25, actually through 10:1. When they came down from the place of worship and returned to town, Samuel took Saul up to the roof of the house and prepared a bed for him there. At daybreak the next morning, Samuel called to Saul, "Get up, it's time you were on your way." So Saul got ready, and he and Samuel left the house together. When they reached the edge of the town, Samuel told Saul to send his servant ahead. After the servant was gone, Samuel said, "Stay here, for I have received a special message for you from God." Then Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it over Saul's head. He kissed Saul and said, "I'm doing this because the Lord has appointed you to be ruler over Israel, his special possession." And so Samuel has Saul sleep on the rooftop. They had flat roofs back then, and often in a really hot desert area, they slept on the roof. So that's where he slept, there on Samuel's roof. And so Samuel made sure that Saul was fed and he was rested before sending him out on his mission. So here we are talking about distractions, but also we need to talk about rest. It is important for God's servants to need to eat, to have rest, to have some time of leisure. But it's also more important when it's time to go out on your mission and not just stay back and enjoy leisure all the time. So there's a time to eat, a time to rest, a time for leisure, but then Samuel says, it's time to get up, Saul. Time to get up from the table, time to get up from the sofa, time to get up from the bed, and be God's man, be God's woman, be God's ambassador. And so Samuel anointed him, and he was to be the prince over Israel. Okay, 10:5, 7, and 9. When you arrive at, so Samuel's giving Saul some confirmations of his anointing. When you arrive at Gibeah of God, where a garrison of Philistines is located, you will meet a band of prophets coming down from the place of worship. They'll be playing a harp, a tambourine, a flute, and a lyre, and they will be prophesying. At that time, the Spirit of God will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them. You will be changed into a different person. After these signs take place, do what must be done, for God is with you. as Saul started to leave, as Saul turned and started to leave, God gave him a new heart. And all of Samuel's signs were fulfilled that day. So the Spirit of God came upon him because he was willing to quit chasing the donkeys and focus on what God's plans were for his life. And it says God gave him a new heart. So I think hopefully we would want the same thing, that we'd be willing to give up the things that are distracting us from being God's person and start listening to God and do his will for our lives. Verse 14. Now Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, "Where have you been?" So this is when Saul goes back home. Saul says, "Looking for donkeys. But we saw they were not to be found. So we went and found Samuel." So Saul is saying, we had a quest. And the quest was first chasing donkeys, but that turned out to be an endless chase. That got us nowhere. When we quit chasing donkeys, then we found God. So all these amusements, all these distractions, these things that are not bad, but they are endless time wasters, we as humans looking for fulfillment in them, but we don't find fulfillment. That's why we keep chasing them. You know, if you found fulfillment, you could stop. But you keep thinking, no, this is going to give me something. This is going to give me something. Give me some, and scientists call this the dopamine hit. You know, that we're looking at social media or we're watching sports or whatever we're doing because we want this bit of pleasure running through our brain. But the problem is it just never, even if we get it, it never lasts. So we look for another, we look for another, we look for another. And that's why it's so easy to get caught up in distractions. As you know, all of us have phones, and it's so easy to get caught up on our phones. Jesse, show this graph. I came across this graph not long ago. This is teens and social media. So on the left is percentages, and then these are graphs of what percentages of teens use these social media sites every day. And you can see at the very top on the right, if it's dark blue, it says almost constantly. And then the medium blue is several times a day. And what you don't see at the bottom is about once a day. So YouTube is by far the most used social media by teens. What the two bars are, one is last year, one is this year. But 71% of teens use YouTube every day, and about 20% of teens are on it constantly. The next one, I think that stands for TikTok. I don't do TikTok, but I think that stands for TikTok. And whatever I know the Instagram is this one. I know Facebook's that one. As you can see, teens don't get on Facebook. You know, that's for old folks. Anyway, but here's my point: is that we're raising a generation that's totally distracted. Now, you may not know this, but you can actually, if you have a child, you can put, or yourself, on every app on your phone, you can put a limit of how much time you spend on it a day. If you find yourself being distracted too much, you can actually limit yourself to a certain amount of time. This is, teens and phones have become such a problem because parents are not being parents. They're just handing a kid a phone and letting them do what they want to with it. There is tremendous amount of psychological research showing that the terrible harm this is doing to the psychology of our teens. In May of this year, the Surgeon General of the United States issues a warning that social media use is the main contributor to depression and anxiety and the mental health of teens. This year, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended a maximum of 2 hours a day total screen time, phone, TV, tablets, whatever, for anybody under age 18, or it will negatively impact their health, their mental health. And I can't say it's doing a whole lot more for adults. Anyway, so the purpose of this lesson was to get us all, as you said, it's made me think seriously about my life. I want you to think about this is kind of a New Year's lesson, I guess you would say. As we all approach the new year, hopefully we're thinking, how can I be a better disciple next year than I was this year? And here's probably one way. I mean, unless you're perfect, there's probably some distractions that you could reduce in your life significantly to where you have more time to read the Bible, more time to study, more time to serve, more time to be a light in this dark world. Because God needs us. God needs us. And Satan wants to distract us. If he can't get us with sin, he wants to get us with this kind of stuff we've talked about tonight, because we're then as ineffective as if we were distracted by sin. Let's see here. So Solomon probably chased more donkeys than anybody. He had the money, he had the power, he had the wealth. He could do anything he wanted to. I think he had 1,000 concubines plus wives, so women were not a problem. You know, he had all the money in the world. He could buy whatever he wanted. And the book of Ecclesiastes, if you read that, it's about his donkey chasing and how he finds it absolutely worthless. In the end, after years and years of chasing after all these pleasures and things of life, he said, you know, this really wasn't worth anything. And here's the conclusion. The verses here on your lesson sheet are at the end, the conclusion of Ecclesiastes. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for that's everyone's duty. The devotional book I use is by Oswald Chambers. This morning I was reading it and I thought, man, this is appropriate for this lesson tonight, so we'll end on this. So hopefully I pricked your mind about, let's do something about this distraction thing. So how do you win this battle? Because it is a battle. You know, our life is a spiritual battle, and these distractions are spiritual arrows that are being thrown against us with Satan. The spiritual battle is lost or won in the secret places of the will before God. Nothing has any power over the man who's fought out that battle before God and won there. I must get the thing settled between myself and God in the secret places of my soul where no stranger intermeddles. Then I can go forth with the certainty that the battle is won. The reason the battle is not won is because I try to win it in the external world first. You fight spiritual battles before God, not out in the world. This is the great divide in life. From the point where we either move towards a more useless type of Christian life or a life where we are more and more ablaze for the glory of God. So that's our choice before us, each one of us. Each of us has that choice. Whether to just to be average Joe Christian, come to church, say I'm a Christian, maybe say a few things good for God, or really, truly be a light, be salt. And we have to fight the battle, the spiritual battles before God. And one of them is dealing with all these distractions that the ruler of this world is trying to get us distracted from serving God with. So as you begin the new year, I want you to think about this. I want you to spend some time before God and know that you can be a better servant of his. I know I can be. I know I can be. So let's join this together and decide to do this. Anyway, thank you for your attention. Let's stand and thank God for this lesson and this time together. Father, thank you for this time that we can examine ourselves and realize how subtle and insidious the distractions of the world can be to get us off focus of serving you and being your people, and off focus of having time with you in prayer and study. And Father, we're sorry. We're truly sorry, because you are the most important relationship in our entire life. Because of you, we have hope. Because of you, we have life. Because of you, we have so many things that we wouldn't have otherwise. So we give you the praise and the glory, and Father, we want to give you our time. Lay our time at your feet. Show us how we should use it to be better Christians and better servants of yours. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen.